Today's session, data-driven learning and communicating in the other culture. The communication detective at work. Actions speak louder than words. This is the simple idea of this session. It's a simple idea, but you as an American come from a word-dominated culture. While many others count on nuance and context to get their message across, we are verbally specific. We are verbally elaborative. This can be particularly true in business process and contracts. Other cultures are not verbally specific and not verbally elaborative. Once again, to solve the problem, pull over in the slow lane and start looking around. You have to look. Actions speak louder than words. But what do the actions mean? Okay, so let's think about a market analysis. And what do those objectives include in a market analysis? Demographics and segmentation, target market, market need, competition, barriers to entry, regulations. Investors want to see some data up front before they jump in. Get some data before you jump in. We're going to call our data observable perceptibles. This means anything you can see with your eyes or anything you can perceive with your other senses, hear, touch, taste, smell. That's pretty simple, right? No judgments, no conclusions, no scrunching up your face, no saying, what? No immediate analysis. Delay that until you have the data. Collect pure, simple data, observable perceptibles. Observable perceptibles will lead you into the realities of the other culture, slowly by slowly, as the Indians say. So here are the three big things to look for: actions, objects, and scenes. An action is anything you can see someone doing. An object is any observable perceptible that you can see, touch, anything that makes a sound, anything you can smell. It may be a motion, a color, a light. It may be as big as a room or a crane or as small as a nail or a tea bag. A scene is like a snapshot. It's like a one-act play, a mini event, a moment. It combines actions and objects, and you can see it all at once. You can take a snapshot and tell everything that happened in that scene. The best scenes to look for are ones that repeat themselves. For example, every time you meet the local manager, he takes 2 steps backwards. Gather the data. Take the snapshot. Or, for example, every time you increase production, someone says, well, we should ask Mr. King. Well, it happens he's the oldest employee. Or every time something goes well, there's a celebration, and the workers pour some celebratory drink on the ground. Take the snapshot. Gather the data. Or every time, well, you fill in the blank. A scene can be greetings at an airport or any other place, a day at a factory, a financial transaction or a series of those, a wedding, a funeral, a dinner at home, traveling across town, planning meetings, a day of engagements in which you're working towards a goal with colleagues. Try to choose a scene with some physical and time borders, something that begins in a certain place around a certain time and seems to end at a certain time. Choose a scene that involves others and something you think is routine for them. Observable perceptibles will lead you into the realities of the other culture slowly and probably fairly accurately if you continue to collect the data. But not too fast. There's an obstacle. Foreign observables, other culture observables, probably don't mean what familiar observables in my culture mean. This is the obstacle. The observables probably don't mean what familiar observables in my culture mean. Okay, we're going to think about hats. You see a hat, and what does it mean? Maybe it says Ocean City, New Jersey on it because it's a favorite place to go, or the Phillies because they're my favorite baseball team, even though they were in the cellar this year. But I also buy a no-logo hat to keep my head from burning in the African sun, or any old hat to keep my head from getting wet. The last two have function, but they don't really have meaning. In other places, hats may mean something. For instance, here in Myanmar, if you're an elected representative, unless you're military, you must wear a hat while doing the business of government. And each hat is distinct and represents not only a region, but a history. And how about those British judges and the wigs they wear? What do they mean? Well, the point here is that hats may have meaning. The point is that what you see and hear may be the familiar, but the meaning it carries may be different in a different place. When we look, when we observe and perceive with our senses, that begins to evoke meaning. All you have to do is think of a favorite food cooking, and it has a memory attached to it. Maybe it's your mom's meatloaf or a cake. You get it. So smell, sound, touch, all that helps us gather meaning. Much data you gather may include language, but it's also beyond language. You want to trust the data ahead of the language. Actions, objects, and scenes speak louder than words. Okay, so you rarely see a football helmet dangling in blank space. Hope you don't. Put a bunch of hats, say helmets, on the heads of large men on a Sunday afternoon in a stadium, and given those three contexts, large men, stadium, Sunday afternoon, given those contexts, your analysis leads you to conclude it's football. It's not an Easter parade. See the data. It can be complicated, but eventually you can sort it out. You have to have the data. Dr. Donald K. Smith says there are 12 signals or clues, and they signal meaning and are attached to our data. They give the communication detective clues to meaning in objects and actions and scenes. So here you see those 12. And let's ask what clues or signals are attached to hats. Well, number 5, artifacts. But they also have color, number 8. And if it's a helmet, it'll have a kind of feel to it, number 9. And you may be seeing it as part of a grouping of 11 or 22. So that's number 3. And an arrangement, a formation, which is number 10, spatial. It'll also have a logo. That's number 4, picture. So you get the idea. Hats have meaning, and the meaning of hats is delivered both by isolating one or more of those 12 signals and by seeing them in combination. After you begin to see them repeatedly, you begin to figure out what's going on. And later on, when you see one clue or a couple of those signal clues together, for example, spatial arrangement formation, you understand even more and conclude almost automatically and be right. That's not true necessarily at first. It takes a lot to grow up in the sensibilities of the culture. But if you had never been to an American football game and somebody tells you, oh, they wear hats when they play, you're likely to think, well, their words don't quite mean what I've observed. I have data. I have actions, objects, scenes. These hats have a more specialized meaning related to their purpose. Okay, on to the British East India Company. Well, the British East India Company had established a presence in India as far back as 1612, and they administered factory areas established for trading purposes. This business, for all practical purposes, was the government of India for much of 240 years, until the Indian Rebellion of 1857 broke loose, and it forced the company to dissolve. Well, they should have known better. Maybe they became blind to the culture because they became part of it for such a long time. But they should have observed and analyzed a local point of view and loved their neighbor in an understanding way. The object and meaning attached to it should have been obvious. Well, what is it? It's a gun cartridge produced by the British. A little more complicated than that, but this is the straw that broke the camel's back. Throughout India, Indian soldiers called the sepoy worked for the British and were issued with a new rifle, the pattern 1853 Enfield rifle musket. The rifling inside the barrel ensured accuracy at much greater distances. To load the rifle, the soldiers had to bite the cartridge open so their mouth was touching it, and pouring the gunpowder it contained into the rifle's muzzle, and then stuff the cartridge case, which was typically paper coated with some kind of grease to make it waterproof, into the musket as wadding before loading it with a ball. It was believed by the Indians, and these included both Hindus and Muslims, that the cartridges, and note this is about the meaning the Indians attached to the grease on the British cartridges, that the cartridges were greased with lard, and this was regarded, pork fat was regarded as unclean by the Muslims, or they were greased with cow fat, now regarded as the Hindus as unclean because they hold cows to be sacred. All these soldiers were angry about this grease and what was being thrust upon them. British officers dismissed these claims as rumors. But there had always been rumors that the British had sought to destroy the religions of the Indian people. Forcing the native soldiers to break their sacred code was the final spark that started the rebellion. And that put an end to the East India Company. You have to care about meanings attached to the data, to the objects, actions, and scenes. You don't want your company to end this way. You do have to have the data first. Let's move on to the story of Nunchi. A book on Korean business etiquette tells this story. It's about a couple cross-cultural issues, but one is Nunchi. Nunchi is the non-verbal response of my eyes to your verbal statement, or simply my non-verbal eye-based communication. A Korean executive expected a non-Korean to be able to read his response. Nunchi is about face reading. You'll hear the word high context used. Americans are low context. That's about being direct, elaborating everything in words, and expecting words to mean what the dictionary says, or at least expecting words to be the primary tool for communication, either orally or written. And so words for us are the most important communications. A good way to think about high context cultures is to think of it as reading, but not reading words. You have to read between the words, between the lines. You expect indirect language, like where maybe means no. And you have to read objects, actions, and scenes. In the case of Nunchi, it's no language at all, just my gaze. Right? In a sense, you're so literate about what's going on that you don't need to hear someone say directly, I don't feel good, or yes, that's a good deal. Okay, so this is the case. The foreign manager of a joint venture company wanted to move the offices in Seoul, Korea, to a place that was less expensive and more convenient for visitors. He found a suite of offices in the downtown area of Seoul. The firm's offices had been located in a very expensive, inconvenient location in Yoeda, near the National Assembly building. At the last moment, the Korean president of the company wouldn't allow the move to take place and wouldn't explain his reasons to this foreign manager. The situation developed into a sticky impasse and created ill will on both sides. The Korean president had opposed the move from the beginning. He'd relied on the foreign manager's ability to read Nunchi, to understand that he was firmly against the move, although he had not said so directly. The president preferred the Yoeda location because it was one of the most prestigious districts in the city. It gave the company face on the highest government business level. Someone observed the Yoeda location had nothing to do with rent and had everything to do with where the company president wanted to pull his car. The president and other Korean personnel didn't simply come out and tell the foreigner that there was no way they were going to move the offices, because they didn't want to confront him directly with their objections, because they didn't want to cause him to lose face in a contest that he couldn't win. They felt it was up to him to ask the right questions and read the right answers. So in this situation, actually both sides lost face and the cross-cultural communication failed. So this is how the Korean boss should have been read. This is what he was saying. Forget about relocating the offices. I'm the boss, and being in this neighborhood gives our company and me status, so we're going to stay. Other cross-cultural issues were at play here, issues of power distribution, in which the boss has all the power and authority, and issues related to harmony, in which the boss tries to use munchi to avoid shaming anyone. Of course, all that backfired, and he did face some shame. Everything happens at once. Everything happens quickly, and we have to slow it down in any way we can. For those of us with low context, just tell me mindset, we have to learn to read again. Asking of the scene, hey, what's really going on here? Be a scene reader. Read the components of social scenes, actors, setting, action, including real bits of talk. And value insider descriptions over your own. Pay attention to how the locals see these things. Pay attention to the ordinary and what people take for granted. How do they talk about, characterize, or understand what's going on? The goal of all this is learning. How do the insiders see and experience? How do the insiders see and experience events, meetings, regular workplace processes, planning, managing, decision-making, negotiating, hiring, you name it, seeing and developing markets, etc. All right, in all this, how will you be the communication detective? How will you coach someone else to pay attention to those actions, objects, and scenes that speak louder than words? Here are 8 steps to get legitimate data that leads to successful relationship and business understanding. First of all, get there and look at the broad scene. Get to know the people by entering their broader social setting, and observe with an eye to seeing a range of incidents and interactions. So we've been talking about focusing on one particular scene. I'm saying when you get there, look broadly, and then begin to select. That's number 2. Identify one narrow scene as noteworthy. Thirdly, take that scene and data mine that scene and other similar ones. Use the signal clues that we've talked about as observation tools. Take some notes. Think of these as work products. Fourthly, review all the observable, perceptible objects, actions, and conversations in the whole scene. Use those work products and go through them. Discuss them with colleagues or include a trusted local. Fifthly, avoid judgments. If your friends are making judgments about what they say, mock them. Get the data. 6, look for regularities, for patterns, for themes. What always or often happens? What's always there? What is often said? Look for those patterns. Very important. Take your data, look for patterns. 7, make any and every conclusion penciled in only. It's tentative, reviewable. It's a building block. More data is coming, and add that in. And finally, 8, ask again. Am I being aware of what is important to other culture people? So pick a scene, work through that scene, get the data, and hold on to keep looking at that data, and ask those very important questions about what is this that I'm seeing, but don't draw your conclusions too fast. Well, this is our conclusion here in this session. All this will lead you to taking control via data and analysis so that you're not a victim, so that you don't feel like a victim, so that you don't feel like someone being run over by the other culture. This data collection and data-driven analysis leads you to being a cultural interpreter, generally, and in the business setting.